Because, I mean, Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison, all those guys, they were our big brothers. And we used to get drunk with them all the time. And since they were all gone, we said, well, let's just honor them by playing their songs. And so we put a bar band together. The very first show was 200 people with the Vampires. The second show was 200,000 people. Rock in Rio. And it was one of those things where nobody was expecting that, but all of a sudden, you know, we were at Rock in Rio. Now, Duff McKagan with Guns N' Roses was on bass. Joe Perry on guitar. Myself. We played in front of 200,000. Johnny was used to the Viper Room, you know. And so he's standing there, and I said, okay, let's pretend this is a movie and you're playing a rock star. I said, you do the same show for 20 people that you do for 20,000 people. It doesn't matter how many people. You can drown in 2 inches of water, or you can drown in 2,000 feet of water. I said, just go out and be a rock star. And he was such a natural, and a great guitar player too.
Yeah, he really can play.
He's a very good guitar player, yeah.
And when you put him up there, next to Joe Perry, you'd think, well, why do we do Johnny? But yeah.
Yeah, but he can play right along with Joe. And what it is on stage is Joe's over here, I'm in the middle, and Johnny's over here. So every once in a while, I have to go way over here just to get a little attention. When I come back over here, because all the girls are looking over here.
It's funny, well, it's not funny when it happened. I was at that show in Coney Island when all of a sudden Joe wasn't there.
Yeah.
Had a little,
Joe got very sick that night, and that was one of the nights Johnny took over and played all the guitar.
Yeah.
Johnny and Tommy.
Yeah, it carried on seamlessly.
Yeah, so that kind of proved to people that Johnny can handle it,
How did, so the genesis of this Hollywood Vampires Club is a bunch of musicians like yourself would gather, was it at the Roxy or
just
something?
Having fun.
Or the Rainbow?
Yeah.
And but how did you get in there? Because, you were the young buck at that time, really.
I was the original Hollywood Vampires was a drinking club. And it was myself, Mickey Dolenz, John Lennon, Harry Nilsson, Keith Moon. It was all of the insane guys from LA. And we all met every night at the Rainbow, and we would drink all night. And so the waitress, she said, we only see you at night, and all we ever see you do is drink. You're like a bunch of vampires. And we went, Hollywood Vampires. So it became a drinking club. And, after that's when Johnny and I were doing Dark Shadows, is when I started telling him about the vampires, and that's where the whole thing came out of that.
Right. And then that first album was obviously all covers of...
Yeah. We just picked all of our favorite covers. T-Rex stuff and, Bowie stuff and things like that, and a couple of our own things,
And to go back to what you said about, how Alice doesn't say anything on stage, much like Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Was it a difficult transition now when you had to front the Hollywood Vampires?
No, it was really kind of cool. I mean, it was because all these songs are songs that we all wanted to do. And I didn't really realize I didn't have to play Alice until I got up on stage. And we'd start a Doors song, and so I would tell a story about Jim and I, And then we would do a Who song, and I would tell a story about Keith Moon and I. And it just got to be one of those things where the stories were so great. You couldn't let the audience go without those stories.
Yeah.
But Alice would never do that in our show. I try to keep him so he's non-human, and that's what makes Alice, puts him apart, because I don't even hang out with him.
How do you keep Alice fresh year after year?
Alice is an entity onto himself, I'll be sitting here like this talking, and now if the curtain came down and I put all the makeup on and everything, the next time that curtain came up, it would not be me. It would be Alice. And he has a whole different way of doing everything. I always thought that the villain got the best lines. Rock and roll did not have a villain. Rock and roll had all Peter Pans and no Captain Hook. And so I went, well, I'll gladly be Captain Hook, you know. And the band, we had that image anyways. We were always sort of the outsiders, you know. And so I just kept pushing Alice further and further and further until it got more and more theatrical. And now the show is that, you know, it's always been very, very theatrical, but it's even more theatrical now.
When was that moment that it hit you to try that? And then when was the moment that you knew it was working?
Okay, so it's kind of a funny story, if you have a warped sense of humor. We're gonna play the Toronto Peace Festival, about 1968. And we're on between John Lennon and Yoko and the Doors, at the very end of the night. And we get on stage, and at the end of the show, we used to open up 2 pillows and hit it with a CO2 cartridge and put the strobe lights on. So it was just this crazy thing with the music going. And I look down, and there's a chicken. Now, I didn't bring the chicken. I don't know who sat there and went, I got my wallet, got my keys, got my chicken. Time to go see Alice. I, being from Detroit, have never been on a farm in my life, okay? It had wings, it had feathers, it should fly. So I picked it up and I tossed it into the audience, thinking that it would just fly away. Somebody would take it home, call it Alice, and give it a good home. The audience tore it to pieces and threw all the parts on stage. Next day in the paper, Alice Cooper kills chicken, drinks the blood and everything. And at that point I went, oh, they want a villain. And I went, ooh, I'll gladly be that villain. Now, here's the kicker to that story. The first 5 rows were all in wheelchairs. They're the ones that killed the chicken. A week later, we check into a hotel, and who is in the hotel? Colonel Sanders. So I take a picture with Colonel Sanders, and I'm the bad guy. He's killed 7 billion chickens, and I didn't even kill the chicken, you know, but I'm the bad guy. But I did realize at that point that they did want somebody to do something like that to bring another element into rock. And at that point, that's when I realized that Alice could go darker and funnier, you know.
And so do you remember roughly the first show or tour that you actually tried this character, and when did it, you know, really stick?
Well, there were 2 Alices. There were, at the very beginning, when we were doing 18 and the original band, that Alice was a representation sort of the outsider. He was the whipping boy for society. He was everything that was wrong. So he took all the blame, they hung him at the end, the whole thing like that. When I got sober, I could not play Alice that way anymore. When I got sober, I thought, Alan Rickman, I'm gonna play him like this arrogant, condescending, you know, villain. And that's the character I play now, because he's much more fun that way. But I couldn't go back to this, you know, sort of beat up guy, because it wasn't that anymore. The alcohol was gone, the drugs were gone, everything was gone. Now I was like this. And I said, okay, I've got to play him a different way. So I reinvented Alice into a different character.
You know, you mentioned being sober for so long. Did it ever interfere, though, with performing, or were you able to still always get through a performance?
Well, the weird thing was I never drank on stage, ever. That was the one place where I didn't drink, was when I was working. So Alice was never drunk on stage, even though the original Alice, I always made it look like he was pretty wiped out. You know, after that, the new Alice didn't need any of that. He was, you know, he was an entity unto himself. And but it's so funny when I look back, you know, when I went into the hospital for alcohol, the psychiatrist was going, so how much do you drink on stage? And I went, never. He says, well, if you're doing a movie, how much? Never. If you're in the studio, no, never. He says, so Alice isn't the problem, you are. And I went, man, you're right. You know, I didn't realize that Alice was fine. He was doing what he did, you know. I was the problem. You know, Dr. Frankenstein was the problem, not the monster.
All right.
You know?
Well, and that show that you referenced with the chicken, 1969 it was
Yeah.
in Toronto. Yeah, like you said, it just came out. It's a movie. It's called Revival '69, and you actually see this taking place with the chicken, and it's historic for the fact that it was the very first show that John Lennon did outside of the Beatles.
Yeah.
And he literally flew to Toronto that morning from London and called up Eric Clapton, Klaus Vorman, and Alan White, who then became the drummer of Yes. And said, got this show literally like 2 or 3 days notice. And Clapton said, yeah, they picked me up, and we actually rehearsed in first class on the plane.
Yeah.
And plane.
Well, John was so good. I mean, John was. The coolest thing is they always tell you never meet your idols, and you get to meet everybody in this when you're in this world. And everybody I met, the bigger they were, the nicer they were. The Beatles were the nicest people ever. Yeah. You know, the Stones were the coolest people. Elvis was great. Sinatra was great. Those were the guys that I wanted to meet, and they had nothing to prove. They had already done everything. So you always find that the guys on their way up are the egocentric guys. It's never the guys that have already gotten there, you know.
Who have you not met, or that you would have liked to have met, or would still like to meet?
Do you know, most of the people that I didn't meet are not here anymore. I never met Tom Petty. And you'd think that we were all in the same world, and yet I never met Tom Petty. Pretty much everybody else I met. I actually held a gun on Elvis Presley.
You went
that
there,
story?
So go ahead.
It's a great story. I get invited by 1972. School's Out just came out, and it was a big deal. I get a call. Elvis wants to meet you in Vegas. And I went, wow, okay, this is gonna be great. And I get to the hotel. He had the whole top of the hotel, and you get in an elevator. You know, and they search you, you know, which is weird because everything else is up there. And it was me, Chubby Checker, and Liza Minnelli. Weird group to go up, you know. And so we go up, and you're sitting there, and this is when Elvis was not drugged out, drunk Elvis. This was Elvis, leather Elvis, you know. And when he walked in the room, he was the room, you know. And, you know, as he meets everybody, he says, hey man, it's you the cat with a snake, right? And I said, yeah. He says, you got the makeup on and all that stuff. I dig that, man. That's cool. He says, you're from Detroit, right? Well, not Detroit, Detroit. And I went, yeah. He said, come here, I want to show you something. I said, okay. So I go in the kitchen with him, just me and him, opens the drawer and he hands me a loaded .38. Now I'm from Detroit, I'm ready to say, I'm taking the bullets out, you know, because he's got the Memphis Mafia in the other room. And he said, I'm going to show you how to take a gun out of somebody's hand. And so I'm sitting there with a loaded .38 on Elvis Presley. Little Angel goes, shoot him. Greatest rock story of all time. Alice Cooper shoots Elvis Presley. Yeah, little devil over there saying that. And the little angel comes up on this side and goes, no, don't kill him, just wound him though. You know. By the time I said that, the gun was out of my hand. I was on the floor, and his boot was right here. That's great, Elvis. Can I get up now? And then he says, this was something that really taught me something. He says, you want to see my most prized possession? And I'm going, yeah. So I go in the other room, go in the bedroom, he closed the door, and I went, wait a minute. Most prized possession. And he says, sit down, I'm going to show you something. And he opens a drawer and he takes out an envelope full of x-rays. I'm trying to put this together, going, most prized possession. And he says, what happened was, he said, I was coming out of the show the other night. He says, and 3 drunk cowboys want to fight me in the parking lot. I called my boys off and I fought all 3 of them. Broke this guy's ankle right here. He says, and then I broke this guy's collarbone right. And I'm going, this is your prized possession. And I realized it was his only contact with the outside world. He couldn't go to the movies. He couldn't go to a restaurant. He couldn't do anything that all of us can do because he was Elvis Presley, the most recognized character in the world. So he lived in this world where he could have anything he wanted. If I gave anybody here the biggest mansion you could imagine and said you can have anything you want in that mansion, but you can't leave, you'd find a way to kill yourself. You would eat yourself to death, you drug yourself to death, you do something. Because it was so unnatural not to be able to have a life. And he was so big, he didn't have that life. Same with Michael Jackson. You get to a point where you can't move because of your popularity. And right then I thought, I never want to be this big. I never want to be at the point where I can't go out and shopping with my wife, or I can't go have lunch, or I can't, but that taught me something right there. And I felt really sorry for him. He was a great guy, really great sense of humor, made fun of himself all the time. But he was a prisoner of Elvis Presley.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah.